All right, the judges will now introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. If it is there, yeah, I guess it is afternoon. I'm on Central Time. I'm Dr. Michael Anderson. I live in Walker, Minnesota. I'm a retired professor and educator. We're going to go fast with our introduction so we can save time for you. Molly.
My name is Molly Russell. I'm an attorney at Legal Aid of West Virginia who specializes in domestic violence law.
I am Ed Philpott. I'm a trial attorney and I practice in Laconia, New Hampshire.
And we'd like you to introduce yourselves, please, and perhaps your teacher.
We're Unit 4 of Maggie Walker from Virginia. I'm Grace.
I'm Quinn Smith.
I'm Margaret Smith.
I'm Tejas. Our coach is Mr. Olmschneider, and thank you so much for judging us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. Okay, so we're in Unit 4, just to be clear, correct? And we are on question 1. I'll read the question in its entirety, and then you can begin your prepared statements. Are you ready? Okay. Unit 4, how have the values and principles embodied in the Constitution shaped American institutions and practices? It would be inconsistent with the constitutional separation of the executive and legislative powers to let the prerogative, meaning pardon power, be exercised by the latter. What were the framers' reasons for giving the president the pardon power? Do you agree or disagree with them? Bullet 1, according to the framer, James Wilson, if the president abuses the pardon power, he can be impeached and prosecuted. Do you agree with Wilson? Why or why not? Bullet 2, in your opinion, what constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors? You may begin.
In Locke's words, the prerogative is the power to act according to discretion for the public good without the support of the law. One element of this prerogative power is a strong pardon, which exists both as a check on the judiciary and as a tool of statecraft, as Hamilton writes in Federalist 74. Relying both on British tradition and Lockean ideas, the framers granted this power to the executive. They argued the pardon was best vested in the president because the responsibility for one man's life is best felt by a single person, and because the public can easily hold one man accountable for corruption, unlike an entire legislative body. This argument, though it was enough to get the Constitution ratified, has proved overly optimistic. In reality, the pardon has been an arbitrary lottery for those fortunate enough to have money, partisan favor, or media attention. The power of public opinion is far less effective than Hamilton predicted, as presidents throughout history have abused the pardon power for pure political gain, rather than to mitigate harsh justice for the common good. What began as a noble concept has shifted to a dying power at best and a tool of corruption at worst.
To rein in abuses of executive power, like the pardon power, the founders gave Congress the power of impeachment, following colonial and British precedent. This precedent was established in the impeachment of Senator William Blount, who worked with the British to profit off of an invasion of Florida and Louisiana in 1799. The Article 2, Section 4 process of impeachment provides 3 reasons for presidents and other officials to be impeached. The first 2, treason and bribery, are straightforward, well-defined, and rare. The final category, however, is quite vague: high crimes and misdemeanors. One definition of high crimes and misdemeanors is to limit it to acts falling under the purview of the criminal courts and federal statutes. For example, Nixon refused to comply with a congressional subpoena regarding Watergate, which was a crime outlined in the U.S. Code of Laws, not some action unique to the executive office. A second definition of high crimes and misdemeanors includes maladministration, corrupt acts and mismanagement. However, this term was rejected at the Constitutional Convention in favor of the term high crimes and misdemeanors because the framers viewed maladministration as too vague.
The third approach to defining high crimes and misdemeanors would get at the spirit of what the founders intended: skewering conduct unique to high office. Although similar to maladministration, conduct unique to high office particularly applies to abuses of the powers that are given to elected officials or those in public office. One example of this was Judge Humphreys of Tennessee, who was impeached for taking a Confederate oath of office. Although this was not a crime, nor was it necessarily corrupt, it was an abuse of power and trust that was uniquely granted to him as a federal judge. Similarly, the impeachment of Judge George English included partiality and favoritism to those whom he was indebted. More specifically, he provided improper privileges at the bar to his referee in bankruptcy. Judge English was also termed as tyrannical at the bench, often subverting the rule of law. Although neither of these are crimes nor fall under the vague standard of maladministration, they are clear examples of abuses of power unique to high office.
When a president abuses the pardon power granted by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, he can certainly be impeached. Although George Mason worried that the president would exploit this power for his own gains, Madison reminded him that if the president be connected in any suspicious manner with any person, and there be grounds to believe he will shelter him, the House of Representatives can impeach him. If a president pardons somebody for his own political or personal expediency without any other justification, then he has exploited a power only someone in high office has. President Clinton did this when he pardoned Mark Rich, a billionaire with clear personal ties to the former president, who was indicted on over 50 criminal counts. Clinton abused the unique power that he was given as president with absolutely no connection to upholding the common good. To be clear, not all pardons of presidential connections are impeachable. President Ford's pardon of former President Nixon went beyond political ties to do what he believed was best for the nation in order to put the long national nightmare that was Watergate behind it and move forward. The pardon has proven to be susceptible to abuse, and when abused, could be an impeachable offense. It is thus clear that the theory of prerogative and control of its abuse by impeachment cannot survive modern partisanship and are in need of reform.
Okay, let's hear about those reforms. You ended with it, now in need of reforms. What would you do?
I think one reform we could adopt is similar to how Canada adopts its own pardon power, where they have an independent tribunal called the Parole Review Board that reviews every single pardon and ensures that that pardon has a valid justification that isn't just based on personal connection. So that's definitely something that we could use here in the United States.
I think we don't even need to look further than our own states. For instance, to use Georgia as an example, they operate on an independent board model for handling their pardons. Georgia issues over 400 pardons per year with a 60% approval rating.
Okay, with that idea in mind, then would President Obama have ever heard anything about marijuana injustice in sentencing if a pardon board filtered that out and it never got to him?
Well, I think the pardon board doesn't necessarily filter out all of that. And I think this is also a problem we already see within the federal system, where the attorney general will often filter out clemency recommendations before ever reaching the president himself.
So adding another filter is a solution?
I actually would disagree with my colleagues. I think taking some of these filters away would be better. There's actually a bipartisan effort under President Trump's administration with Jared Kushner to move the pardon vetting from the Department of Justice, so it goes directly to the president's desk. So more pardons and commissions of crimes can be seen.
Yeah, but doesn't that increase the possibility that people who are able to curry favor with the president can be given advantageous pardons or better access to the president? So there's that would leave it completely unfettered with no check. Am I right?
One way to mitigate that would be to reinstate the President Polk's practice of giving a detailed reason for a pardon. So really explaining why he's pardoning rather than just arbitrary favor or partisan favor being the reason for the pardon is granted.
Molly.
Should a president be able to pardon people he's been in business with, his family members, people he has a strong connection?
So theoretically, yes, but we would have to look at the principle of universalizability to determine whether that pardon is justified. And what that means basically is that the president's reason for providing a pardon has to be applied to every single other person in a theoretical concept. So if the president pardoned, as President Bill Clinton did, his own half-brother for a drug charge, he should be comfortable with pardoning anybody else of a drug charge, whether or not he does so. So if that personal connection follows that principle with that justification, then it's okay. But if not, then it's not.
I think you can also look to see if somebody deserves a pardon outside of being connected to the president. For example, Reagan pardoned former owner of the New York Yankees, Mr. Steinbrenner, and he had donated a lot of money to his campaign, but he also helped out with an FBI investigation in later years, and that's why he was offered that pardon. He did something beyond just his political ties to deserve that.
Ed.
So how do you reconcile that process with the fact that we still have a lot of people incarcerated, for example, for minor drug charges, despite President Obama's pardons, and we seem to have a system that favors some people over people of color?
Well, I think it's necessary to remember that the pardon power is by nature arbitrary. As Hamilton writes in Federalist 74, that's its design. When we're talking about institutional issues with Black and brown people being incarcerated at higher rates, you need institutional change there. The pardon power has always existed as a tool of statecraft and as a tool for the president's policy agenda, but it isn't going to be able to make those types of institutional reforms.
And I think it's important to understand that under Article 2, Section 2, the pardon vesting clause, the pardon can only be used against crimes against the United States, whereas people arrested on state drug charges would not be able to be pardoned, but the president can perhaps put pressure on state governors to pardon all people convicted on state drug charges within those governors' borders.
So it's your opinion that the pardon power can't fix some sort of social injustice, and we shouldn't expect it to?
I would say not necessarily. We do see presidents such as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt using it as a policy measure. But more recently, especially under President Clinton and President Obama, it's really more of a Band-Aid on top of individual cases rather than as a whole policy.
But I do think the president can use his power to pardon as a way to get the ball rolling on certain issues. And I think you can look to former President Grover Cleveland's pardons of non-premeditated murder as a way to sort of get the ball rolling on his canvassing for a new criminal code.
You're muted, Molly. There you go.
Sorry, got it.
Okay.
Do you believe impeachment to be an effective tool if the president has done an improper pardon?
I think impeachment could be used as an effective tool, especially because it's humiliating almost to have to go through impeachment. It can tarnish a president's legacy for years and years and years afterwards. Although a president has not yet been impeached for a misuse of a pardon, that danger perhaps of being impeached and tarnishing one's own legacy probably allows a president to be a little bit more judicious in terms of the pardons he brings out.
I think absolutely, I would definitely agree with my colleague. If a president issues a pardon that abuses his power and abuses the Article 2, Section 1 presidential oath, then this is clearly something that you could be impeached for. I'm not sure if in our current state we would be able to impeach him, but I do think that he should be.
I would actually disagree a little bit. I think that while impeachment is used in the United States, it's not really used as frequently and it's not as effective as, for example, how Great Britain uses the vote of no confidence to remove their executive, which is a much more intimidating use of removing them from office.
So how many pardons do you know of that happened before the end of a presidency?
Very few. We can look to perhaps the most recent examples, for example, of President Trump pardoning certain military officials who were implicated in crimes, for example, as well as his own colleagues, such as Michael Flynn, as examples of presidential pardons that occurred before the last day. But we can also look to President Clinton passing the vast majority of his pardons on the literal last day, almost the last hour of office. And
So if that's the case, how could impeachment ever be a remedy? Because they're always doing it right before they're out of office anyway.
I would actually argue that, and disagree with my colleague a little bit, that this is more of a recent historical trend. I think throughout history, we've seen plenty of sentence commutations and pardons issued before the end of a presidency. This phenomenon really begins with Clinton, and it kind of tails off with Bush and Clinton. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that a president could be impeached if the majority of his pardons are still during his term.
And I think it's also important to remember that a president can be impeached after he leaves office in order to set a precedent for the rest of the country.
So I go back to the effectiveness. If it's a lame duck president, there's not much time left. How effective is impeachment in that instance?
I think that we can look to President Ronald Reagan's involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal, in which that was in the very last tail end of his presidency. And it was quite possibly something that he would have been impeached for had it been earlier. But because we saw the lame duck period shortened under President Roosevelt's administration, there wasn't much that Congress could do at that point, and it wasn't an effective thing for them to be pushing.
But does that argue that there should be better or different checks on the? Oh, well.
Is that the time? I was looking down writing. Did we see
That
the
was
time?
the time.
Okay.
That was the time.
Whew. Okay, there's.
Thank you so much, students. Congratulations.
You get, yeah.
And the judges will now give some feedback.
Great. Great. So something happens at these events. This is my 16th national finals. So I know some of you are just 16, so that makes me old. But something happens at these sessions that I really think is important. We just had a long, pretty deep conversation that was picked up by both sides of both the judges and the teams. And you maintained that discussion at a deep level throughout. That's a compliment. That was very good. I really like your answers about the early pardons, and that, you know, maybe some of you know more than others about different things, you know, and you were able to say, well, you know, I don't agree with that. There were some earlier pardons, but I doubt if that's going to happen anytime in the near future. But you did a really nice job with that. And you brought up so many examples, Reagan and Iran-Contra, you brought up FDR. I always try to end with a little bit of humor, let the other judges talk. I'm disappointed there were no Patrick Henry references. So I don't think I've ever been to a Virginia judging session where somebody didn't bring up Patrick Henry. You did a nice job. Molly?
I'm going to echo my colleague's sentiments there. I wanted to keep going. It was just a great back and forth conversation that I think everybody enjoyed. So well done to you. I thought you guys did a great job of looking for answers outside of the United States. Now, you did bring in what other states do in terms of pardons, but I liked hearing, you know, this is what they do in Great Britain, this is what they do in Canada. I appreciated that. And I appreciated a reference to Polk. Haven't had a good Polk reference in a while. Good job, everyone.
I have to agree with everything. That was a fun conversation, and that's the best way that I can describe. It's only my third national finals, but having done this before, that's the only way I can describe what I would consider a very successful presentation is when it becomes a good, stimulating conversation for everybody. So well done. I felt like I really wanted to keep going as well, and really think you guys had quite a command of the information. You lost me with a couple of things, so nicely done. Well done. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to judge us.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Judge.
Our pleasure.
It's our pleasure, really.
Thank you guys so much. Congratulations once again. I'm going to invite the judges into the breakout room.